I hear a lot of feedback coming from somewhere.
Okay, I'll mute.
That somebody's on the train.
I'll mute people and hopefully it will go away. Right, so is that
gone away.
Fantastic. Right, well, welcome everyone to our weekly call. I think it's going to be an interesting discussion this week. You hopefully will have seen my update, just with a reminder on our agenda, which this week the sort of main topic of discussion is on the impact of post-quantum cryptography on DNSSEC. And in a moment, I will hand over to Moritz, Muller and Jins, Jong to take us through a presentation on that very topic. And then after that, time permitting, I'll pick up on the discussion that we deferred from last week, just to give a sort of summary of some of the recent pronouncements from the European Commission from a few weeks back now on matters related to DNS, which may be of interest to people if you haven't picked up on them already. And then we'll move on to any other business. Firstly, I should say, though, particular welcome to everyone from the US, who I know has had, well, depending on which bit of the US, some significant challenges with the weather this week. And I think I heard John say in background there, he's on day 10 of being on generator power, in which case, particularly well done for making it onto the call. I think that shows true dedication, so thank you. So right, well, without further ado then, let me hand over first to Moritz and to Jins to sort of take us through a paper they presented, I think 2-3 weeks back now, on DNSSEC and the impact of post-quantum cryptography, and which I suspect is a topic that's going to come up quite a lot over the next little while as people start to give ever more thought to the impact of quantum on various types of cryptography. So if you're ready to pick up, guys, I'll hand over to you and look forward to an interesting presentation. Thanks, both of you, for being able to join us.
Thank you. Can you still hear me, by the way?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, for having us. As you've mentioned, we've presented this work also a few weeks ago at DNS.org. So sorry for the ones who attended there as well. Also, we did a version of this presentation at a RIPE DNS working group meeting a while ago, but this is an updated version. And especially, I would take this time also to get some more feedback from the community, maybe also a bit more the community outside of Europe as well on this topic as well. So this has been joint research from different organizations in the Netherlands. Jins is working for TNO, which is a research organization in the Netherlands, was together with folks from Encrypted Labs, who among others developed the Unbound resolver, and I work for SIDN Labs, which is at the registry of the Dutch CCTLD. And in our research, we had a look into the impact of post-quantum cryptography on DNSSEC. Next slide, please, Jens. So, as you've probably all heard at some point, there are people working on quantum computers, and these quantum computers applying Shor's algorithm could break public key cryptography at some point. Now, we still don't know yet when this might happen, but the threat is being discussed at least. And this would then also impact a bunch of protocols that we use on the internet today, including TLS, but also DNSSEC. And whereas there has been some research on how this might affect TLS, for example, and how they could apply post-quantum cryptography to TLS, it has not been discussed yet how this could be how this could affect DNSSEC. So the main research question of our short discussion paper was: are there algorithms which cannot be broken by current computers and can also not be broken by quantum computers that could be suitable for DNSSEC? And luckily, at the moment, there is a standardization competition by the American organization, standardization organization NIST, and they are on the third round, and they're currently assessing these quantum-safe algorithms. But before we dive more into how these algorithms affect DNSSEC, Jins will give you first an introduction into the different quantum-safe algorithms which are out there.
Yes, thank you, Moritz. Well, first, let's start with a few words on post-quantum cryptography, why we need it, a slight idea of what it is about, what can be done, what cannot be done, and well, also we've added a couple of inside ideas from the standardization competition, which is highly relevant for this for our work. The first is that many organizations around the world are trying to develop a large-scale quantum computer. Fascinating thing. In 2019, Google claimed quantum supremacy for the first time, which was a major step, although not, they're not breaking RSA yet. But there are two ways in which these quantum computers are relevant. The first is they can be used to search efficiently. That's a quadratic speedup. That's Grover's algorithm. It's well known, but it's for cryptography not that relevant. Its main importance is that you need twice as long keys, but using keys, double in size is not dramatic. It is one of the reasons that, although many people think 128 bits of security is sufficient, many algorithms are present that allow 256 bits of security to counter this threat. The more exciting one is Shor's algorithm, which achieves an exponential speedup in discrete subgroup finding. For example, could be used to break RSA or elliptic curves or discrete logarithms. And that means it breaks all current public key encryption. Well, when could this happen? That's a highly non-trivial question. But if you take a guess, then it could happen in the 2030s. If it's early 2030, very early, of course, next year, but it seems unlikely. Early 2030s, late perhaps 2040s, then RSA in its current form could be broken and would not be usable anymore. So what do we need? Post-quantum cryptography, cryptography that can resist such a quantum computer. Should always, of course, also be safe against a classical computer, but that seems obvious. And what it is, it uses the same structure. We have a public key, we have a secret key, and we have signatures or key encapsulations. Key encapsulations are the equivalent of the messages used to determine a shared secret, for example, in discrete logarithm problems. For DNSSEC, however, the signatures are the most interesting, and we'll concentrate our attention on those today. And I'll give a short introduction into the remaining mathematical problems that are used to construct these signature schemes. This is not to present you with all mathematical details, but because it provides some guidance into what could happen, what is looked at, and what is not looked at. The first one is multivariate cryptography. What one tries to do is to simultaneously construct a system of polynomial equations, and to break the system, one has to solve this system of equations. And you can do two things. You can either use it to produce a key encapsulation mechanism, but this turned out to be quite hard to do. It's because let's have a look, the number of equations is less than the number of variables you have. And this is also what gives them a bad reputation among some people. And it's also why some people are hesitant to use the signatures. However, the signatures are much easier to construct since they have precisely the opposite condition. And that means that it's possible to construct very safe signature schemes based on multivariate cryptography. A few of their features are large public keys and very small signatures, which is, of course, from DNSSEC's perspective, quite interesting. The second is well known. It's lattice-based cryptography, and it's the most known, most expected candidate. It can be used for public key, for well, signatures, for key encapsulation, and for a lot of other things. It's by far the best studied, the most studied, and the best understood of the problems. And if we look at the signatures, what strikes us is that they're average-sized keys, average-sized signatures, although compared to today's standards, these are still very large. There are two problems that are treated, and that's the shortest factor problem and the closest factor problem, that can easily be drawn. And the shortest factor problem is, well, given a lattice, so given these two red arrows, what is the integer combination that gives you the blue arrow? Well, that's quite difficult to see, even in 2 dimensions. And then the closest factor problem would be, well, what integer combination of these two arrows would come closest to the green dot? The last one is hash-based cryptography. And it stands out since it's not really based on a mathematical problem, but only on the existence of a safe hash function. Well, everyone will be quite convinced that those can be constructed, and using those, signatures can be constructed. These cannot be used for key encapsulation or for other primitives, but for signatures they do, and they're considered extremely safe. Their specifics are that they have very small keys, but quite large signatures, which makes them not a very appealing candidate. What's furthermore interesting is that some of those are based on a tree structure, which is not unlike the structure of DNSSEC itself, which has also led some people to suggest, well, perhaps we can use a similar structure to guarantee integrity and authenticity of the DNSSEC messages. Okay. Based on these things, there's well, NIST has started a competition with a large number of submissions. However, for all these mathematical problems, I've stated one or more problems or issues. There is not a perfect candidate yet, which is also the starting point of this research and the fundamental problem. However, there are long-lived secrets that need to remain secret in 20 years when there could perhaps be a quantum computer that breaks RSA. So the need for post-quantum cryptography is imminent. And this is perhaps a bit of the tension in the field. Ideally, one would like to wait another 5 or 10 years to look for a standard and a really suitable problem and construction, but we simply do not have that time. And it also, well, that plays a role through the entire process. So already many of the, 75 submitted proposals, several were cracked within weeks, sometimes even days. And still, as of last week, regularly, some minor tweaks and updates on attacks are published. So we're still understanding the cryptographic reviewed cryptographic proposals better every week, which in one side raises our trust in them and believe that they're actually safe. But every week it's still possible that a fatal attack is published, which is quite exciting. If we then have an overview of the remaining algorithms, then there are a couple of things that are visible here. There are still 3 finalists left, 2 based on lattice, 1 on multivariate, and there are a couple of alternative candidates on multivariate or hash-based approaches. For references, I've put the elliptic curves that are currently used in purple down, and one sees that the keys and signatures used have wildly varying parameters. Some are extremely large, some are very small, and some are intermediate, which is also quite a wide range actually. the algorithm stated here would correspond to, well, what's called security level 1, which roughly corresponds to 128 bits. And the expectation that has been stated at the start of the third round, the final round, is that at most one of the lattice-based algorithms will be standardized, and perhaps in later cores, one of the multivariate or one of the hash-based, and one of the hash-based algorithms will be standardized. But recently, some doubt has been casted whether this will actually happen or whether a change to the final round or next steps will be made. However, that's still very new. I hope that gives a bit of an overview into what the things that we're playing with. One final thing is that I've added here is that cyclic rainbow, which is a variant of rainbow, but with a much smaller public key. And at first we discarded it, and later, well, thought it again and have asked, well, why did we discard it? It uses some, well, techniques to make the public key much smaller, but it turns out that it also makes it much slower. So whereas Rainbow 1 has a decent performance, such a alternative, well, a related scheme could easily be a factor 10 or 20 or 50 slower. But okay, I'm not the expert on that, so on that I'll give it back to Moritz, who can tell you much more about this.
Thank you. Let me also share my screen. All right. You should see now my screen as well in full, I hope.
Yep, that's very clear.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks, Jins. So based on this information that you got right now, you probably already have the idea that we probably cannot just apply one of these algorithms directly to DNSSEC. And the reason for this is that DNSSEC and DNS and the underlying transport protocols, they have some limitations. And the first limitation we've discovered or that we could think of was the limitation in the payload size. We all know from experience, but also from measurements, that payload above 1,230 bytes or around this size can get fragmented. And fragmentation could be an issue because then also the DNS message might either get transmitted slower or in some cases does not get transmitted at all. Also, what we've seen in the past, or at least quite often, is that DNS is still quite attractive for misuse in denial of service attacks. And if we would have very large keys or very large signatures, then this would make DNS even more attractive for these kind of attacks. So we would like to have as small as possible keys and as small as possible signatures. Then we have the validation performance. We have now seen that resolvers can validate thousands of signatures per second with the algorithms currently used. But we have also reason to expect that DNSSEC will get still popular in the future. We do still see an increase in DNSSEC deployment. So we expect that DNSSEC validation will be occurring even more often. And then signing performance. We have different requirements when it comes to signing. In some cases, we have to sign very large zones, for example, for a TLD. In other cases, we might have to do even on the fly signing, and then we also have very high performance requirements. Based on these restrictions, we derived 3 requirements, and they are very rough requirements, but they help us to get an idea which algorithms might be suitable for DNSSEC. And the first one is that we think the signatures should be smaller than 1,230 bytes. And I will explain a bit later as well why we think that keys could be bigger in some cases. For validation performance and sign performance, we chose these thresholds just to have a rough way to categorize the different algorithms. What we then did was we think that signature size is the most important criteria. So therefore, we only had a look into the algorithms that create signatures smaller than this threshold. And this leaves us with 3 algorithms which are still part of the NIST competition. In this table, I will go quickly through the different attributes of these algorithms. And here again, for comparison, you have 2 algorithms which are currently used in DNSSEC, so that you have an idea how they perform compared to the state of the art right now. The first algorithm is Falcon 512. And Falcon 512 is a lattice-based algorithm which has quite good performance. And also the public key and the signatures, they do seem to be quite right. They are bigger than the signatures and keys that we see today most of the time, but they still fit this requirement of smaller than 1,232 bytes. However, as soon as we would transmit 2 public keys, for example, or multiple signatures in one DNS message, then we might already go beyond this limit, and then we again might run into the risk of fragmentation. 2 other algorithms, which are in this case multivariate schemes, they also have quite good performance. Here also what Jins mentioned, Rainbow 1A has a different version as well, but there the performance is significantly slower. And they have very, very small signatures, which are on par with ED 25519 or even better. So this makes them very interesting for DNSSEC, we believe. However, if we look at the public keys, then there we see that the public keys are quite big. They're even that big that we cannot put them into regular DNS messages anymore, since the maximum DNS message size is 64 kilobytes. So there we might have to find a workaround. So one of the workarounds would be to, for example, distribute a key out of band. So instead of putting the key material directly into the DNS record, we discuss that we could, for example, put a reference into the DNS key record where then the resolver would go to using, for example, a different protocol like HTTP and fetch the key from there. Of course, this has also the disadvantage that then DNS operators would have to provide a different server, for example, or a different instance where this key is then hosted. And also recursive resolvers would need to understand this new protocol to fetch the key as well. Also, this would also, of course, increase the response time to fetch this key. If we would only have this problem of an increase in signatures, then we could hope for an increased TCP support. And there we had the Flag Day recently, where the Flag Day had the goal to increase TCP support at resolvers and authoritative name servers. And if resolvers would be able to fall back to TCP, then they would still be able to fetch keys larger than this threshold that we selected. For validation performance, if we would run into problems of too slow validation performance, then we could just increase the TTL of a record, and therefore resolvers would have to validate less frequent. But we also acknowledge that this might not be possible in some cases where you really need very low TTLs to do, for example, load balancing. And in general, we think that it might be necessary to look per zone which algorithm might be suitable. For example, for the root zone, you might want to select algorithms with a higher security level at some point, which then again have different requirements and attributes. So from this quick overview, I hope it is clear that DNSSEC can probably be adapted to use quantum safe algorithms, but there's still some work to be done. We've seen also, as Jens mentioned, that things still move quite fast in the development of quantum safe algorithms. And this might also then lead us that we have to have a look at algorithms which we haven't discussed here, like hash-based signature signing algorithms, as also already colleagues from VeriSign have done, and I think also published in a blog post, which then would require even a completely different model of key distribution, signing and verification. And all the time, I think we have to keep in mind that even though these quantum computers still seem to be a bit science fiction and still seem quite far away, we have to keep in mind that routing to a near algorithm in DNSSEC and probably in other protocols as well takes time. We had a study recently where we had a look into the deployment of, for example, ECDSA in DNSSEC, and there we've seen that it took more than 10 years before ECDSA got reasonably high deployment at domain names and support at resolvers. And this was with an algorithm which is very well known already right now. So this is why we think that we already have to think about the transition to quantum safe algorithms now. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention. Thanks again for the invitation. And I was also wondering if here the community is worrying about this at all, where you think this is a problem. And also I was wondering, when do you think we should worry about this, this topic?
Brilliant. Thanks, Moritz and Jins, for that very interesting presentation. So if I could ask people if you could raise your virtual hands, preferably on Zoom, or if not in the chat, if you've got questions. And whilst you're thinking of them, let me take Chairman's prerogative to ask one, which is effectively to ask you back the question just asked, Moritz, which is, do you have any view on when the quantum safe cryptography will be needed, notwithstanding the sort of almost science fiction level, some of the debate at the moment, but how much time do you think there is? And then we'll see if anyone else has any differing views.
I'm not the expert in quantum computing, so I'm not sure when they will actually be a threat. The only thing that I can say is that from my experience so far is that just the time to roll the things out will take a lot of time, probably a decade or so, especially now that we have to also modify the protocol in some way or another. So this will probably take even more time. But of course, we do not have the same problem as we have in TLS, for example, where we have to keep things secret for a very long time, since signatures and keys in DNSSEC are not that used for such a long time. So at least there, we are a bit more agile than we are in protocols like TLS.
Yeah, perfect, thank you. Right, I can see 3 raised hands. So in the order that they raise, we've got Chris, then Jim, then Simon. So Chris, do you want to unmute and ask your question first?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Excellent. Thanks for the presentation. I agree that the future here is quite interesting, and I'd love to, I guess, do what we can to help figure it out. You'd mentioned a number of possible ways you might deal with, like the size of these keys, fetching them, and new restrictions or requirements that would impose on recursive resolvers. I'm wondering, given that Cloudflare operates both a recursive resolver as well as an authoritative server, if this is more of like an open question to you specifically, the presenters, as well as people in this room, if you'd be interested in sort of like experimenting with any of the proposed mechanisms here to figure out exactly how these might work in practice. Yeah.
We're very interested. So right now, I'm supervising a student who is looking into the key distribution mechanisms. He is still in his preparation phase, so we don't have much concrete things there. But I think, yeah, we would be more than happy to bring this a bit more into practice as well.
Excellent. I'll drop my email in the chat. We can follow up offline.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris, and Cloudflare as well. Jim, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, great presentation, guys. Thanks very much. I remember Kenny Patterson gave a great talk at the IETF a couple of years ago on post-quantum crypto. One of the things that stuck in my mind for that presentation was him saying that valid or real quantum computers are 20 years away. And he used that in the context, he was saying that it's just like fusion, that's always 20 years away. So I think it's not so much the timing of when we can actually build valid quantum computers that can do really good stuff on crypto. I think more of a concern is how quickly can these algorithms be rolled out or be standardized. So rather than worry about when someone can actually build one of these computers, I think we have to figure out is when will NIST finish its deliberations? And given the fact that, from what you were saying before, that some of these post-crypto algorithms, post-quantum algorithms seem to have better qualities to them than the existing stuff we're using for DNSSEC, smaller key sizes, fairly good validation characteristics and so on. Maybe we should be thinking of making the move to these algorithms once they're standardized, regardless of what's going to happen with quantum computers.
Yes, well, I think there are a couple of things. If these all of these algorithms turn out to be safe and remain secure for the upcoming years, then some may be indeed better signature schemes once they've been implemented than the currently used. However, this is especially the multivariate, so Rainbow and Gems. They have very small signatures, which is really appealing. However, it requires a couple of steps before they're implemented in DNSSEC. They're not straightforward new algorithms. And the NIST competition should end by the end of this year. That's the proposed schedule.
Okay, so I guess it'd be watch this space then on that point, Jins, in terms of seeing what comes out the other end. And yeah, I suppose to Jim's point, if they're ready for deployment and good, then yeah, why wait, particularly if it's going to take a decade to push them out anyway. Okay, right, I see that Simon raised his hand in the chat, so do you want to come on, Simon?
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, an observation and a question. I note that UK and US government websites give different dates as to when we require from quantum resistance, and there's a whole lot of other dates out there of course as those as well. Question is, there's a whole load of efforts going on in parallel out there, of course, as I guess you appreciate. You might have covered this in the early part of the talk. I'm afraid I missed that bit. Apologies if you did. But so I would note ETSI, NIST, the Chinese pushing in ITU to try and get something done quickly. How do you see all these efforts, standardization wise and from algorithm wise, coming together, please? Is there a clear winner, a clear path in your view, or are they all still fighting it out? Thanks.
Thanks, Simon. Do either of you want to?
Yes, well, I guess for most applications, lattice-based algorithms seem very popular. However, there are some angry tongues gossiping about institutions trying to push them without good arguments, and for that reason, there is a movement that really would like hash-based signatures and code-based public key key encapsulation, since these are regarded as very high security alternatives. However, for DNSSEC, we see that another problem appears, the requirement, the preference for small signatures. And so to keep some agility in protocol development or design, there is a need to have several standards with different key characteristics. And of course, there's always the hope and also the reasonable possibility that new, better performing or different methods will appear in the future. But the NIST argument is, we need something urgently. So we need a standard. And the fear from our side, I think, is that once there are standards, hard to use something else. So if a unsuitable algorithm would be standardized as a signature, it may become much harder to use something else in DNSSEC with all kinds of well, possible consequences.
Thanks, Jens. I see that Jim has posted what I think is a rhetorical question in the chat, which is, will small DNSSEC SIGs matter if most lookups go over DOE?
Yeah, I think this is a good point, and I think also if we would rely completely on TCP or maybe even QUIC, you never know, we might not have the problem of these too large signatures anymore. That's correct.
Yeah. Although I guess some of us would like the reassurance that the content that's been delivered over DNS is in fact valid when it's delivered to us, not just encrypted, but that's a whole different discussion. Okay, any other questions from anyone? Take that as not. I think there's a lot of food for thought there, in fairness, quite a lot to absorb. So I think that's very interesting presentation. And I think this is a topic which will be prevalent for some time to come, as lots of different people grapple with suitable replacement algorithms in various areas. So thank you both, Jins and Moritz, for giving us the update. And if it's okay with you, I've had a couple of requests already for copies of your slides. So are you okay to forward those, and I'll share them out with people on the call?
Yeah, sure, we'll do.
Fantastic, thank you. And you're welcome to stay on the call or disappear if you've got other pressing engagements, or whichever works for you. But thank you both for your time, which is very much appreciated.
Thank you. I'm afraid I'll have to leave, but thanks for the opportunity to present here.
Fantastic, thank you, Jens. Right, by way of a contrast then, I mentioned that we would also touch briefly on some of the recent announcements from the European Commission from a week or so ago. Sorry, a few weeks ago, apologies. So I'm just looking to change and get this on screen so you can see what I can see. Let me just share my screen. So all being well, you can see my screen on display. And all I'm going to do is just briefly sort of walk you through this condensed version of some slides from a couple of recent Commission presentations, which, if I just see if I can make this go down. So the first set really cover, as you can see on the slide, the Commission's cybersecurity strategy and NIS2, specifically looking at the DNS-related components of that. And you can see on the slide, just sort of really highlighting in the cybersecurity strategy that the Commission announced just before Christmas in mid-December. They announced an intention to develop a DNS root system contingency plan and to support the development of a European DNS resolver service, or DNS4EU, as it's being christened, as well as to accelerate the uptake of internet standards and do some work around WHOIS, which seems to come up an awful lot in different presentations. I'm not going to go through all of that, but just really to highlight sort of those first 2 points. So firstly, I think there's some concern within the Commission about the stability of the internet under various circumstances. So what they've really been looking at is a contingency plan to improve that stability, specifically looking at the root, the DNS root system. And are looking to do some work with the sort of 2 EU DNS root server operators, as well as member states and others, and to provide some funding as part of that activity. And perhaps most tangibly, looking specifically at the DNS4 EU announcement, I think again there's concern about perhaps declining level of choice for end users when it comes to public DNS resolvers. I know we touched on centralization last week, so another instance of centralization or consolidation of internet infrastructure. And I guess from a European Commission's perspective, the fact that most of those are operated by non-EU entities is a concern to the Commission, which in their view increases vulnerability to outages, etc. So they're pushing a plan to encourage greater diversification amongst ISPs, and in particular to look to develop a new resolver service, DNS4 EU, as an alternative to some of the other open resolvers that are out there. More detail.
Sorry, Chris. I just wondered what exactly is meant by that DNS resolution diversification strategy. Is it intended to say that European users should be using a larger number of different resolvers, or is it something slightly different for that?
Obviously, I'm not a spokesman for the European Commission. For the avoidance of doubt, I probably should have put that health warning at the start. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to say that, Chris. But I think seriously, in this instance, it's not necessarily greater use of alternatives, but the existence of more choice. And specifically to that end, the point of the DNS4 EU initiative, more details of which I think are coming later this calendar year, and I think from what's been said around mid-year, is an intent to offer some form of matched funding to encourage the private sector to provide one or more alternatives to the existing options available in the marketplace. Clearly, using them is probably, I would suggest, outside of the gift of the Commission, but at least having them there to be used, I think that's certainly what's intended behind these initiatives.
Well, yeah, I can understand that on the EU companies providing resolvers and ISPs providing resolvers, but the mention of browser vendors there implies something about client-side choice. So, yeah. Simply creating more resolvers doesn't necessarily require anything on the browser vendors, but yeah, it's an interesting question. I wonder if they've elaborated it more, or whether that's still to happen.
I've certainly not seen that. I suppose there's an implication there around, dare I say it, such things as discovery standards, possibly. Well, as I say, I believe that more detail is coming around mid-year on this. But if anyone has on the call has seen any more details already, sort of feel free to raise your hand or put something in the chat if you prefer.
Well, yeah, it'd just be nice to know if there's something that DNS discovery should support. It'd be nice to hear about it earlier rather than later.
Indeed. And I certainly think the reason for flagging it, I think this is something which, if people haven't picked up on it, I would strongly recommend that you track this over the next sort of 2-3 months and see what detail comes out. It's entirely possible that some of the people on this call may well have an interest in pursuing this more directly, of course. The other thing I should say, actually, topically, which you may have seen in the news headlines in the last week, since this initiative was announced, of course, the number of European-based, not necessarily EU entities, but at least resolver operators, public resolver operators based within the continent of Europe has increased because Quad 9, you may have seen, has relocated its headquarters from the west coast of the US to Zurich. So not necessarily within the EU, but certainly within Europe. So that is one change to the landscape since this initiative was announced a month or so ago. I'm just quickly changed subjects. I don't want to dwell too long on this. Again, if you've not picked up on it, some offline reading for you to do, just to look at the Digital Services Act package, which again was announced by the Commission in mid-December, which update some of the plans and provisions around sort of different types of activity, just to really bring in line the legislative framework with how the internet sort of market is structured now compared to, I think, around 2000 when the sort of previous legislation was brought in. And the key thing I wanted to highlight, this chart shows how the Commission is looking at the marketplace. You can see you've got these 4 tiers of intermediaries, hosting services, online platforms, and then very large online platforms, with intermediaries including things like ISPs, domain name registries. If I recall, I think it did actually have resolver operators in at least one of the pieces of material I've seen in presentations and so on, at that sort of outer layer. And then if you go up the value chain, crudely speaking, you get sort of further into the sort of nested series of circles, and as you go up in scale, you equally sort of go through there. The implication for that is the obligations on providers increases as you both go up the value chain and also go up in scale. So you can see it's a relatively light touch for intermediaries, a lot more obligations for very large platforms, and a little bit of variation between for the other two there. And there's similarly a bit more detail there, just in terms of basic transparency obligations, just for relevance. You can see that intermediaries and hosting services basically have the same obligations, and then it gets more onerous with the online platforms and the very large online platforms. So there's, I think, a lot more detail you can access for those of you that's of interest to, but I thought it was just worth highlighting those, partly in response to a couple of email queries from various people suggesting it'd be useful to cover, and also because it came out in mid-December, and potentially for some people could have been overlooked, given there's a whole lot of other things on at the time. So it's a very quick run through, but I hope that was useful. Let me stop sharing my screen. I can see there's a few things in the chat that people have picked up on, so hopefully that's helpful as well. Can't really take questions on that for the simple reason, as I say, I'm not representing the Commission, but hopefully you all know people that do that, or who are able to find the detail if it's pertinent to your respective businesses. If we move into any other business, the one other thing to highlight, those of you that have registered for IETF 110, if you're planning to put in any internet drafts, the cutoff is midnight tonight, I think UTC. So if you haven't submitted them already, you better get writing pretty soon. Otherwise, you'll miss the cutoff if they're not in the next few hours. But with that in mind, if I stop talking for a moment, does anyone else have any other business that you want to raise on the call this week? Give you a moment to.
Andrew, this is Zaid. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Yeah, just want to see if the audience would be able to maybe a presentation by one that knows more about what you just talked about in terms of the DNS for EU. As maybe we have more time to digest the content that you shared with us. So maybe like, a couple of weeks down the road, if there's a chance we can get someone representative to drill him or her on questions that the community may have.
Okay. Would that be of interest to others, or to take a very loose straw poll on that? Don't need to reply now. If you do, I'll take it to say that you are interested. If others are interested, maybe just drop me a line offline.
That would be very interesting, Andrew.
So was that? It would be, Jim.
That would be very interesting. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, if anybody else has any views on that, as I say, fantastic. Drop me a line offline, and particularly if you've got any suggestions as to who would be a good person in the commission to get on that. I know the HLIG team. If there are any others you think would be better than them, by all means suggest them to me offline, and we'll see who we can get on to talk about that. So duly noted, Zaid. Thank you. Anyone else with anything you want to raise on the call?
Yeah, Andrew, Glenn here.
Okay.
Just a quick update about what's going on over in the Adaptive DNS Discovery Working Group over at the IETF. So we had a call out for working group adoption of 2 documents, which closed already. The chairs have been working with the document owners on name changing and final decisions. So for the one document, which was the BTW home document, which addressed DHCP and RA assignment of resolvers, that document did pass working group adoption call. And I have been working with the authors to select the new name and get that document published up there. The new name, the short name is going to be DNR, which stands for Discovery of Network Designated Resolvers. And the full document name is a mouthful. It's DHCP and Router Advertisement Options for the Discovery of Network Designated Resolvers. So that's a bit of a mouthful, and we're very grateful we have DNR as a short form, so we don't have to say that over and over again.
So it's not short, do not resuscitate then, Glenn.
Yeah. So I'll be sending, I'm just waiting for the authors to finish with their Git stuff, and we'll get that set up. But if people are paying attention, draft 00 of that document is now available in the working group repository on Data Tracker. So, and the chairs are still working on the requirements document. We're assessing the call. It wasn't as clear on the consensus, and so the chairs are chewing on that and trying to make a final decision. So we'll be in touch soon. The final thing is we're going to be putting together a draft agenda for ADD for the IETF 110 session. And again, we're going to follow the same format we did last time, which was heavy on the discussion, light on the presentation. We have 2 sessions. One is for 1 hour. Unfortunately, the way it got scheduled is that 1 hour is now early in the week, and or like earlier in the week. And then the final session, which is on Thursday for the 2 hours. So we wasn't ideal, but it's what they fit into the schedule. So anyways, that's it from ADD land.
Fantastic. So the co-chairs are earning their big bucks by having to make all these hard decisions then, Glenn.
Well, so I'll say we are both, Taylor and I are very committed to the philosophy that we're not trying to make decisions for the group. We're trying to listen to what the group's decisions or for itself. So we're merely interpreting, not leading.
Fantastic. That's a great update. Thank you. And good news that we've now got 2 adopted document, or 2.5 by the sound of it.
Keep them coming. Keep them coming. There's still hours left to submit more drafts for consideration.
So if anyone's got any bright ideas, there's still time. Thanks, Glenn. Anyone else with anything else you'd like to raise in the last a few seconds? Last chance for any other business to bring up. And if not, just to let you know, we should have a discussion next week on progress with some of the early DOE deployments. Just to give you a heads up on where some of the resolver operators are at with their deployments, which I'm sure will be of interest. More details of that to come. And then we've got a few other presentations lined up over the next few weeks, although we will of course be taking a break during IETF 110 week to avoid diary clashes for that week. But that aside, there's plenty to come in the next few weeks. So thanks everyone for your time. Have a fantastic week, and we'll speak again this time next week. Thanks all.
Bye.